Slim for authorization. First, we're going to make a directory and cd into it. Then we're going to use Composer to require Slim for. Once that's installed, we're going to switch over to PHP Storm and do everything else from here. The first order of business is to require slim/psr7. While that's installing, we can create our public directory and then our index.php file within our public directory. Within public/index.php, we will need to use three things. The first is the PSR response interface. We'll use the response interface as response. Next, we'll use the PSR server request interface as request. Then we'll use the Slim app factory. After that, we'll require the vendor/autoload file. This will autoload PHP files via the power of Composer. Once we have autoloaded our files, we'll actually create our app factory, or our app via the app factory, and we're good to go. To kick everything off, let's define a route into the base of our application. Now, each Slim route definition accepts three parameters as the callback: the request, the response, and the request parameters. We'll simply get our response body and write hello world. Then we'll simply return that same response. After we return our response, we'll run our application. Finally, we'll open up our terminal, cd into the public directory, and start our server using php-S and then localhost :888. We'll open a new tab and prove everything works by opening that server in our browser. After that, we'll do a small refactor. We'll create a bootstrap directory with index.php. We'll cut everything out of our public index and paste it into bootstrap index. Then our public/index.php will require bootstrap/index.php. We'll prove it works one more time. Next, we're going to require php-di/php-di using Composer. This will allow us to use this di/container. This is a service container that supports dependency injection. We can add this to our Slim app factory by newing up a container instance and setting the container on the factory. By setting the container on the factory, our app now knows about our service container. We want to prove that everything still works properly. To do this, we're going to go back to our terminal and open up the home page and prove it works. Next, we're going to go back to PHP Storm. We're going to add our app directory. Within app, we're going to add a settings.php file. We'll use the service container here, and we'll hook into the service container by returning a callback function that accepts a container interface defined by PSR. We'll import that above, and then within our callback function, all we're going to do is we're going to say, okay, container, set settings, and return an array. That means we can resolve our container or app settings with the key of settings. Back in our bootstrap/index.php, we're going to require the app/settings.php file. Now, since we're returning a function from that file, we can set this to a variable. We'll call that variable settings. Settings is that callback function that accepts the container interface. Our container variable is an instance or implementation of that interface. We'll pass it through to our settings callback. Now, why do we do this? Well, imagine we go to an endpoint that we haven't defined. We have /defined, but we don't have test, or to be more literal, /endpoint that does not exist defined. So when we go to it, Slim will throw this error, but it's really ugly looking. How do we clean that up? We can actually add global error middleware via this app method, add error middleware, with 3 parameters, all booleans, display error details, log errors, and log error details. Then when we go to that same endpoint, it's going to be beautified with a stack trace. We have more context to debug our problems throughout this project. The last thing I want to do for setup is to move our debug options to our settings binding within our container. We're going to use the same parameter names. We're going to use an associative array that is returned from our settings container binding key. After that, we'll go back to bootstrap /index.php. And we're going to replace that app add error middleware with a service kind of thing similar to our settings container binding. So first we're going to require this middleware callback function from app/middleware.php. But then instead of passing in our container, we're going to pass in our app. Finally, we're going to cut that app add error middleware section. We're going to create a new middleware.php file in our app directory. And then we're going to set up our middleware callback function service. The first thing we need to do is use the Slim app, because the function we're returning accepts an instance of that app. After that, we need to get the container from our app and then resolve based on the settings key. And then we'll call that setting. Finally, we'll replace the app add error middleware hard-coded booleans with the setting values and the setting array keys associated with those values. Finally, we'll open up our terminal, we'll go back to that same endpoint and prove everything works. And that's our initial setup. Time to get on to Slim 4 authorization. Simple.